Hello, sci-curious people of the internet. Have you read Dan Brown's new book, The Secret of Secrets? It's an action-packed page-turner, but it's not all fiction. Today, I'm going to see what he gets right and what he gets wrong about the practice of remote viewing. So, if this book has got you curious about non-local awareness or noetic science, then this video is for you. My name is David Harker, and I'm a remote viewer. I've been one for 7 years, and I'm trained in remote viewing techniques which trace their lineage back to Ingo Swann. Ingo was the so-called father of remote viewing and was instrumental in the US military's 20-year psychic spying program. Let's get started with our list and bust some myths. So, number 1, remote viewing does not require meditation. Meditation's a very good idea if you want to train as a remote viewer. Meditation's a very good idea if you want to make your life better. But remote viewing doesn't need you to get some kind of specialized mental training. You can do it in a relaxed state. If you've ever sat and vegged out in front of the TV, you're in the right state to begin remote viewing. It doesn't need to be anything special, and you don't need to train yourself in any really special ways to get started. So myth number 2, remote viewing does not require trances or other altered states of consciousness. Now, these are useful, right? We use these sometimes, and they can give really startling clarity and great results. But you can do remote viewing, you can do non-local awareness in just a relaxed, normal, awake state. If you're familiar with the named brainwave frequencies, the alpha, beta, gamma, delta, the alpha state of just relaxation is where you need to be just to get started. You can do it in other states. There's some limited EEG evidence that delta and gamma and theta are all involved in different ways in the remote viewing process. And if you have very strong signals in those bands, it can indicate that there's something interesting and relevant to remote viewing going on, but they're not required, right? All you need to be is not be in a beta state. The beta brainwave state is like doing your taxes, right? It's very left brain, very intellectual, very focused. That is no use, right? So anything except beta, you're good. No need to be in a trance, no need to be in an altered state. You can use those things. So slightly incorrect thing number 3 is the idea that consciousness is projected out of the body, all right, and then materializes somewhere else, that you have some part of you which you go boop and you pop it over to somewhere else. We can say that we move our awareness somewhere else insofar as we become aware of something in another location, another time, another space, even, because remote viewing can access conceptual spaces, which we'll come on to later on. So this is kind of confusing the idea of remote viewing with that of out-of-body experiences, sometimes called astral projection. In those experiences, people report having like an energy body and maybe a silver cord that attaches the energy body to their physical body, and it's a very immersive experience. You can do this as part of remote viewing, but you don't have to. This is not part of the definition of remote viewing. So here's a really nitpicky one, number 4. Stargate is not all one word. It's 2 words. It's a super secret project code name. There were a whole bunch of other super secret project code names as well, but Stargate was the last. And myth number 5, which is the most common thing that I see on YouTube thumbnails, it actually was not a CIA project. It was a DIA project. The CIA ended up with the thing after it had got kicked around. It ended up with it right at the end of the project, and it was the CIA that decided to can it. They made that decision to cancel the program based on some pretty sketchy evidence. You can go read the Air report and the responses to the Air report if you want to dig into that can of worms. But the CIA really had little to do with this. They just they were the ones who owned the project when the music stopped and the curtain came down. So there's a few things which are kind of right about Brown's treatment of remote viewing. He says it's a surveillance technique, which, yeah, you can use it for surveillance, but I mean, it's not a replacement for a stakeout, right? It's a protocol which allows you to gather information, and that can be information about ground truth of what's going on somewhere in the world at some time. But we can also get information that doesn't have a place, like the result of a soccer match, right? Or a new invention, or what's going to be in the news next month. So it's a much bigger, broader scope of what we can do with remote viewing than just surveillance. or some kind of military spying type thing, right? And you can do that with it. That's what, it was developed in the US military program for, but it's a much more flexible tool than that. So what is remote viewing then? There are lots of different definitions which people like to chuck around to validate whatever random thing it is they're doing. But the broadest and strictest definition, which nicely separates remote viewing from other forms of non-local awareness, is that remote viewing is the protocol within which we're doing that non-local awareness. I mentioned earlier that you could use astral projection, you can use trance states, you can use various methods where you perform techniques that are all in a very specific order and you write it down on pages and pages of paper and everything's very structured. You can do all these things. All these things can be remote viewing, right? But what makes it remote viewing is the protocol. This was developed as like a military industrial complex kind of project, right? And it wasn't witches and magic and crystal balls and woo woo, right? They had to go and get their funding renewed every year. And you can't go into a room full of generals and say, magic witches have been staring into their crystal balls and divining what the Soviets have been doing. They're going to laugh you out of the room. So the language and the thinking around the development of remote viewing is very laboratory based, evidence based. The language that's used is not woo woo at all. They came up with a bunch of their own concepts to kind of describe what they were doing without having to go down the woo woo route. And within those projects, it was said that psychic was a dirty word, and they were doing psychic stuff. There's no getting around that, but that has a lot of connotations of kind of vague, hand-wavy stuff and fraud and fakery. So how does remote viewing differ? Well, it completely prevents that kind of fraud and fakery because of one really key piece, which is that the viewer, the person who is going to perceive non-locally, is not given any information about their target. This is probably the most important thing that differentiates remote viewing from other non-local awareness modalities, right? Usually you will be given a target number, but this is like a phone number. My phone number doesn't contain information about me. You can't read my phone number, and I mean, I guess you could tell I was in the UK if you couldn't guess, right? But there's no information in there. It's just some random digits. And that's for record keeping. It doesn't do anything. It's not magic. It's not psychic, and it's not part of the process, right? It's just, I'm doing target A from target 1. Off we go. That's it. You've given nothing. So you've given nothing, but there is something that you must describe, a specific target, which you are going to describe as a remote viewer. So you've given your target number. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4. Somewhere, somebody has, say, a envelope with 1, 2, 3, 4 written on it, and inside is a page saying the remote viewer will move to such and such a place and describe this and that, right? But you don't get to see that as the remote viewer while you're doing your work. So you get given 1, 2, 3, 4. You do your perception. You make a record of it. Probably write it down. Maybe you want to do a video or an audio recording or something, but you make a permanent record of what you perceived whilst you were blind to the target. That is, before you found out what it was that you were supposed to describe. And then at the end, you find out. You open that envelope and you have a look at your work and you say, did I describe it? Did I not? This is really great for a number of reasons. First of all, it stops your imagination or your knowledge getting in the way and getting mixed up with any non-local data. And it also means that if you are imagining things and making them up, it's very clear, right? Because it won't match up with the target in any way. And it'll be clear that it was just imagination and mental noise which ended up on the page. This is also great for training because it allows you to iterate and refine your skill as you go. If you have a really good session where you describe the target really well, then you can kind of remember back to when you were doing it. What was I doing? What did it feel like when I was having that successful target? Or maybe you started off really well and went wrong halfway through. And you can kind of take yourself back and introspect on that. What happened there? What went wrong? And by doing that thousands of times, you improve this ability until it gets pretty good, right? I often describe it as like learning to wiggle your ears, okay? I can't explain to you, if you can't wiggle your ears, how to do it, okay? You just have to kind of experiment until you find how to do it. And eventually you'll learn to kind of activate those specific muscles that will wiggle your ears. Okay, and not everybody can do that. But if you want to learn, you've got to kind of start by trying to tense different muscles in your head and, oh, look, that one made the ear wiggle, and you can kind of refine it down. Learning remote viewing is actually the same, right? Because I can't tell you what to do. I can't give you instructions to what to do, particularly in your internal space, where to look for that. You have to kind of explore the experience by just doing it over and over again and being curious about your work. And as you do it iteratively, you kind of converge on what works, what doesn't work, when it goes wrong, why, what's happening in me when it goes wrong, what's happening in me when it goes right. And you get better and better. So it's much more like learning a musical instrument or a martial art or something where, yeah, there's technical kind of instruction that we can give, and anybody can, sit down and get a few notes out of a piano or a guitar, right? Or throw a few punches. They'll be better than not trying, right? You don't have to be special. Anybody can have a go, and you can have a go with remote viewing too. So if you want to give it a try, it's super easy. You can do this. Pretty much everyone can do this, apart from people who are subconsciously terrified of it working for whatever reason, or are very wedded to the idea that it must be impossible, which, is a common belief. I had that before I tried it. I tried it to try and prove that it didn't work, and then it did, and here I am. I do this all the time now. So you can give it a go if you want. I'm running a workshop in a few weeks' time. I'll put a link in the descriptions. And you can also check out the beginner's guide on the remote viewing subreddit, which is like 10 minutes or something. All you need is an open mind and a pen and paper, and it will walk you through how to do this. You can just try it out and do it at home. It's free, doesn't cost you anything, and it's an incredible experience. So I hope you found that interesting, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.